The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. We are back when the Jints, them Bumss, and the Yankees played in New York. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and I've got the two mavens of the time on the line. Alan Blumkin is here.
Hello there, everybody.
Hello, Alan.
Hello there, everybody. Yeah.
Good. Noel Hynd. Hello, my friend.
Hey, Ralph. How you doing?
Good. You weren't here last week, Noel. Alan and I started what we're going to continue. We're going to base the show around a specific Hall of Famer from back in the day. Last week we talked about Johnny Mize, and the conversation was terrific. We branched off into a bunch of stuff. This week, you guys are going to start with the Duke, Edwin Snider, and
the Silver Fox.
Yes, oh my God, he was. First of all, I got to just give a little credit to the all-time Dodger historian Peter Trunk, and a member of the Comfortably Zoned team. Duke is Peter's all-time favorite under any, baseball, the world. Duke Snider is his hero, and rightly so. He meant a lot to the Dodgers, and I'm going to let you guys pursue it and have a terrific show. Keep it going, guys. Start with you, Noel.
Okay, well, as a guy who was growing up in New York and who never rooted for Brooklyn at the time, and being a Giants fan, and then when the World Series came around, I always opted for the Yankees over the Dodgers. Snider has a particular distinction. He was the guy I never wanted to see coming up to hit against the Yankees or the Giants, or my other team of the time, the Cardinals. Snider was a tremendous player. I guess that's probably the understatement of the history of this podcast. Snider always kind of seemed like the guy who was going to eventually beat you. I was not a fan of his at the time, but I know Alan would have the numbers off the top of his head, but didn't Duke have in excess of 40 home runs for several years in a row?
Yeah, I think it was 5 years in a row.
Yeah, I mean, there's 200 home runs.
57, yeah.
Yeah, and they always seem to be big ones, too. They were never in the first row of the seats. They were always gone by the time they left the bat, and they always seem to be key parts of any game. So basically, I developed a lot of respect for Snider after he left the Dodgers and after he retired. I came around on him a little bit when he was with the Mets at the end of his career. And then in probably one of the weirdest baseball moves ever, I believe the Giants picked him up as a pinch hitter, maybe about 1963 or
64.
64. I know he was not happy there, but looking back on the 50s era, even though Snider came up, I know, in 1947, looking back on the 50s era, Snider was, along with, Reese and Hodges and Campanella, really the heart and soul of that team. And they I would love to know what the winning percentage was when they had all four of those guys in the lineup together, because it must have been staggering. Over to you. What do you remember most about Snider, Alan?
Okay, number 4. He was essentially the only left-handed hitter in that lineup. He batted third. He also was a terrific fielder, but the reputation didn't come quickly because of the small dimensions in Ebbets Field. You know, it's ironic that Richie with Mays and Snider playing center field, that Richie Ashburn with the Phillies would lead in putouts most of the time, because the staff he had was consisted of fly ball pitchers. But Duke was a very, very did very well in World Series play for the most part, and he was a staple there from 1949 when he started playing regularly, until they moved out to Los Angeles. It was a very funny thing. I'll run this by you. A friend of mine a bunch of years ago called me up and he said that Eddie, besides Sal Magley, played with Willie Mickey and the Duke. So I started to research this, and I found that Don Lawson pitched 6 games for the 1964 Giants before he was released. So technically, when Mays and Snider were both, Lawson was a Yankee. So Lawson also played with Willie Mickey and the Duke. But it took the Duke quite a while to get into Cooperstown. He didn't get in until 1980. And I thought it was really, really well deserved. And he's been slighted somewhat because he was in competition with Mays and Mantle, who were much more spectacular than he was.
Yeah, probably because Mays and Mantle, at least when Mantle was healthy, they seemed faster. Whether they were or not, I really don't know. I suspect they probably were. Faster afoot, I mean. So Mantle and Mays, as you referenced, had huge center fields to protect. So frequently you would see these pictures of Willie or Mickey, going in, retreating and going to the left, or retreating and going to the right, and making these spectacular catches. But of course, Snider, you didn't see pictures like that because, first of all, he had Furillo on one side of him, and the center field in Brooklyn just wasn't as big as the other two places. So I guess it was a perception thing. What do you think?
Very much so, yeah. Very much so. And, like you, I was a Yankee fan back then, and I hated the Dodgers. I always wanted to see them to lose. And as I mentioned the last time, I used to argue that Joe Collins was better than Gil Hodges when I was 10 years old. But basically, the older I got, the less, I had that kind of bias, and more I appreciated, the team in Brooklyn and what they accomplished. And if it wasn't for a couple of bad managing things, they would have won in 1950 and 51 also.
Yeah, but I forget which one of those players who played with those teams used to say that they missed getting into the World Series by one game in both 1950 and 51.
Yeah, well, in 50 they would have, if they had beaten the Phillies the last day of the season, then they would have forced a tie in a playoff.
Right.
Okay, so they actually lost that by 2 games because they lost the last game, and Duke Snider came up with a hit in the bottom of the 9th inning that Richie Ashburn, who didn't have much in him, threw out Cal Abrams at home plate, and then the Dodgers just died from that, and then Dick Sisler hit a home run, or 3-run home run off Newcomb in the top of the 10th. But the coach that sent Abrams home was fired after that season. And then in 51, of course, I blame the whole thing on Charlie Dressen because he ruined the pitching. They had no relievers for the last couple of months because they were overworked. And when he decided to bring Branca in the Bobby Thompson game. Thompson already hit a home run for Branca in Game 1 of that series, and it was pretty obvious that Thompson, even if the sign stealing was in effect, that Thompson knew what Branca threw.
Yeah.
So, but Dresden had no choice because of the way he mismanaged the pitching. But,
going back to what you said a moment ago about Ashburn making that throw to center field. Ashburn was out of position, wasn't he? He was coming in to cover.
Came in.
Yeah.
To cover second base or whatever. And they sent. He got the ball. Snider hit up the middle for a single, and apparently Abrams. I've never seen any films of this, but Abrams took a long turn around third base, and Ashburn threw him out, and then they walked Jackie Robinson to load the bases intentionally. Walked him intentionally, and then I think somebody struck out, and then Hodges got up there and hit what would have been a sacrifice fly, but there were 2 outs. The game went to the 10th inning, and they lost it in the 10th inning.
Mm-hmm.
Going
back,
yeah, go ahead.
Going back to Snider for a second. Snider finished second to Campanella in the MVP in 1955.
He should have beaten him out.
Wasn't there a controversy about that?
Very much so. He should have beaten Campanella out. I think Campanella won by 1 point. Yeah, the points I happened to research it a couple of days ago was 226 to 221. Okay, 5 points, whatever. Yeah.
I read that there was a sports writer who had been hospitalized, and he had accidentally put in Campanella as both 1 and 5. You voted for 10 players.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
On his ballot, and then there was some confusion about recounting the ballots or something, and so he was unable to change it. Do you remember this?
Not at all. I know that there was controversy at the time, but I do remember, feeling that Snider should have gotten that over Campanella.
Well, if the vote had been disallowed, the vote would have been won by Snider 221 to 212. I'm just looking at it right now, and
they gave you 14 for first place.
That's right. Yeah. If Snider had gotten the 5th place vote, the final vote would have favored Snider 227 to 226. So there's some controversy, 65 years later, whatever it is, that the story's not true. But Snider very, very well could have been the MVP for the 1955 season also.
I don't remember how these numbers, these awards were released to the press. It's not like today where you have MLB doing a Oscar show, basically. But,
pretty much, yeah.
But I don't know what, because that was 55 is the same year that Yogi Berra won his 3rd. So I don't know if that came out earlier, and they wanted to put Campanella on equal footing with Berra, so they gave him the award. And I had no trouble with Campanella getting it in 53 or 51. A lot of people think that Monty Irvin should have gotten that in 1951.
Yeah. Well, it's like any election. It's not like the deserving person wins.
I know.
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't.
I remember
You go. Go ahead.
I remember being very surprised when they gave the 1954 MVP, the American League, to Yogi with the Indians winning 111 games. But apparently, the Indians, whoever supported the Indians, divided their votes between Dobie and Lemon and a couple others, maybe even Bobby Avila. And it said the Indian vote was all split, and Yogi went through that split.
Huh. Okay.
But there have been MVPs over the years of the strange. I mean, I went ballistic when they gave the American League MVP this past season to Mike Trout. I said, how can you be the MVP of a league when you're on a team that went 72-90?
Well, then there's the Ernie Banks syndrome. He got it 2 years in a row with a team that finished last.
Banks' teams weren't worse than this one.
Yeah.
But, and the people saying, well, his WAR is this and blah, 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 blah. I don't buy any of that stuff. And the thing is that you can't be the most valuable player on a team that goes in the league, and a team that goes 72-90. It just doesn't make any sense. I put that out there on one site, and some people went ballistic on me because they thought, all the individual numbers, but
Well, in 55, just to stay with that for a moment, Snider had a batting average of 309. Campanella had 318, but in terms of RBIs, Snider had 136 RBIs. Campanella had 107. Snider 42 home runs. Campanella 32 hits. 166 for Snider. 142 for Campanella, and Snider was in 148 games. Campanella was in 123. And no disrespect to Campanella, because catching is a lot more difficult position even than center field, which is also not an easy position. But Snider had the numbers in almost every category. I had heard stories that Snider could be a little bit surly with the reporters. Not surly, but perhaps not as friendly as Campanella. Would there have been anything to that?
Oh, I know that Snider got the back page of the tabloids for saying that basically the Brooklyn fans weren't very nice. And also the other thing is Campanella in 1954 had a terrible season. He had a broken hand. He batted .207 for the season.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you combine that with Don Newcomb's 9-8 coming back from the Army. That's basically why they lost to the Giants in 1954. But Campanella was much more liked. He's probably, with the exception of Hodges, the most likable player on that team.
Yes,
Even more than Reese. Reese was very liked, but Reese wasn't. Reese was never had the numbers to be an MVP. And Robinson, of course, had a very abrasive personality.
Yeah,
to say the
wonder
least.
why.
Yeah.
A lot of that came across in Roger Kahn's